Okay, I think there's no one else trying to connect, so this seems like a good time to start. Welcome everyone to the Archer 2 training program, Introduction to GROMACS. So let me share my screen. So welcome to the Archer 2 Introduction to GROMACS. This session will be run by my colleagues Holly and Stephen and myself, Julian. And we've also got one of our colleagues, Andy, here, who is here to help if anything goes wrong. So before I start, I will post the link to the course material in the chat. The course page is here. The course material, you can get to the course material if you go down to the bottom of the course page. There's the course material page here, which I'll just also copy into the chat. And finally, we have, for all of our courses, we have a course Etherpad, which you can also find. It's just the course chat. And this is a great place to ask questions, post ideas that are maybe a bit longer and won't fit in just the chat. Also, one of the issues with one of the minor quirks about the program that we're using to share this course is that if you log out and log back in, then you will lose all of the chat history for anything that happened that went in chat before this, which can be a bit of an issue. But anyways, so let me go on there. Actually, yeah, the course chat should be, the course material is this instead of what I put earlier. So yes, welcome to the Archer 2 Brief Introduction to GROMACS course. Today we'll be doing a very brief, very basic overview of GROMACS, how to prepare GROMACS, how to prepare simulations with GROMACS, how to run your GROMACS simulations, and yeah, so we'll be so today we'll be looking at how to connect into the Archer 2 system. Then we'll talk about preparing a GROMACS system so that you can then run it. After lunch, we will start looking at running a GROMACS simulation on Archer 2 and how you can visualize and analyze your simulation data, and also probably how you can visualize your actual simulation. And we'll finish with an exercise on performance and how to get the best bang for your computational bucks when running GROMACS simulations. So for this course, we're using a carpentry style to give this course, and the idea for this is that it's going to be a very hands-on course. So instead of just showing slides and things like that, we've prepared some course materials which you can use. You'll have access to this even after the course. If there's any bits that you forget and want to find out about, or if there's any bits you want to look into in a bit more details after the course, you're more than welcome to use this course material. It'll be here, as far as I'm aware, indefinitely, or close enough to that. But the entire idea of this course is we've tried to make it quite interactive. So rather than just me sitting here talking to you about the various applications and capabilities of GROMACS, we'd much rather you try running your own simulations and you follow along in the actual doing, like preparing of the systems and things like that. Now, feedback is super important. Especially for this course. This is the first time that Holly, Stephen, and I are giving this course, and I think this is the first time that this course has been run by EPCC. So there are definitely going to be some things that we could have done better. There are probably going to be some things that we've overlooked that you would have liked us to talk about. And there's probably going to be some things that we spent too much time on that you would rather we hadn't. At the end of the course, you will be sent an email with a link to a feedback form, and we would really, really appreciate it if you give us your feedback on how you felt we did for this course. And this can be both positive and negative feedback. Both of them are helpful to let us know what we did right, what we did wrong, so that we can then improve the course when we next give the course. Finally, one of the things that I should have mentioned is that for this course, we will be using the Archer 2 system, and also just generally for all of the courses that we give that we at EuroCC give. We ask everyone to understand and follow the Archer 2 code of conduct. The Archer 2 code of conduct, effectively, it's please be polite and respectful of other people, which I've never had a problem with that before, so I doubt this will happen today. The course is flexible, so the way that these courses tend to be at their best is when people ask questions, when people interact. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat. In case you hadn't found it, the chat is here. Please also feel free to post questions on the group Etherpath. So on the course chat, you can say, you can also post questions here. And finally, if you want to, you are also more than welcome to raise your hand in right next to the microphone icon in the center of your screen. There should be a little raised hand icon. If you do that, one of us will, well, I'll probably notice, or whoever is giving that current lecture will notice, and we will be more than happy for you to unmute yourself and ask any question that you might have. One final thing I wanted to mention is that everything that we are doing in this course, this entire course is recorded, which means we will make sure that any questions or anything like that are anonymized, but please be aware that we will be taking a recording of this course, and we will post it on YouTube, so you should also have access to everything that's being said here today. So with that, I think we should probably take a quick 5 minutes. If everyone could go on the course chat and just very briefly introduce themselves. And please, if you could tell me who you are, what your interest in GROMACS is, and what you hope to get out of this course, that would be really helpful. And then we could gear the course to meet your needs. So I'll just start. My name is Julian. And just in case you need access to the course chat. Oh. And one thing I did not mention is that everything that will be this part of the video, we will edit so that any information you're currently writing won't show up in the final video. We will keep everything as anonymous. Yeah. Cool. So that's great. Let me go back and go away. Cool. So far, so far, as expected with GROMACS, there's a lot of biomolecular simulations, which makes sense because GROMACS is an incredible biomolecular simulation package. We've got a LAMPS user. I'm also by practice a LAMPS user. But yeah, GROMACS can do some really interesting things. I'd be interested to hear what sort of systems you simulate, because there are definitely some things that GROMACS can do way faster than LAMPS, and then there's other things that can take a bit longer. Drug screening, enzyme kinetics. Ooh, that sounds exciting. Ooh. Nitrate solutions, interesting. RNA complexes. Ooh, that, yeah. That can be a pain to simulate from memory. And proteins. Yep. Cool. Excellent. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to introduce yourselves. I find that really helpful. But yeah, with that, let's get started with the course proper. The first thing we'll do is we will talk about how to connect to Archer 2 and how to transfer data to and from Archer 2 very quickly. So for this course, you have all been given the opportunity to apply for an Archer 2 account. Before we get started with the actual GROMACS side of things, Holly and I have prepared a number of exercises which are all aimed at working on Archer 2. They can work on other systems, but you maybe won't get quite the same running speeds and things like that as you will get on Archer 2, which means that I guess your mileage may vary. Sometimes it'll take a really long time to run, and sometimes it'll go a lot quicker depending on your systems. So before I start, could I get a quick show of hands to ask how many people here have been able to log into Archer 2 already? Actually, I can do Actually, I might do a poll because that might be a bit quicker. Polling. So I've put up a poll. If you could just say whether you've managed to log into Archer 2. That'll give me a good idea of how much time we need to spend on this section. Cool. It'll also mean that the helpers will be able to, and everyone else who's the other course organizers will be able to see who has been able to access Archer 2 and who might need help with it. Okay, so it looks like a fair few of you have been able to, but there's a couple of people who are still working to access Archer 2. I'll lower everyone's hands. So let's talk very briefly about how you connect to Archer 2. So to connect to Archer 2, you'll need to use a program called SSH. SSH is a program that you can find on I think every Linux system has it. Mac OS comes with it, I think. For Windows, I think if you use the MOBA Xterm software, it should come with SSH, OpenSSH as part of it. To log into Archer 2, I will share my other. So to log into Archer 2, you run from your local system. You can open up a terminal. I use a Linux machine, so I'll be showing this for Linux and Mac. For Windows, I guess you would open instead a MOBA Xterm session and you'd log in that way, but you would need to run SSH -i, and then you want the path to your identity key. Mine is in .sh/id RSA. And then your username, TA059. So your username, my username is TA059JS at login.archer2.ac.uk. And at that point, you need to try to remember your password. And hooray, I managed. And once you remember your password, if this is your first time logging in for the day, or if this is your first time logging in ever, there's a couple of tricks which I'll mention in a sec. But if you've logged in already today, then you should just log in again, like so. If this is your first time logging in for the day, you will get a message asking you to enter your SSH key passphrase. So when you generated, on Archer 2, we operate a two-factor authentication method of logging in, where you will need to provide both your SSH key passphrase and your Archer 2 password to log in. Let me come on here. And you can, and if this is your first time ever logging into Archer 2, you can find all of these things in your safe. So if you go on safe and login account and find the login account that you are trying to log in into, depending on how many courses you've attended or how many projects you're on, you might have between one and many accounts. I have too many, apparently. So find the account that you're interested in, which is this one in my case. And if you click on there, it'll tell you a bunch of useful information, including how much space I'm using at the moment, apparently 1 gig or less than 1 gig. I suspect that's probably less than. And then just the general resources that I have available. So I've got a quota of 10 gig on my home directory, a quota of 100 gigabytes in my work directory, and I've got 20 CUs of budget to use. 1 CU, CU stands for computational unit. 1 CU is 1 node hour. If we go down a bit further, you'll notice that there is an SSH key there, and that's just the public part of my SSH key. And it says that it's active. So the SSH key that I used to log into my Archer 2 account is, this is the public part of that SSH key, which is stored on Archer 2, so that when I log in, there is a check that is done to check that I have the private part of that key, that I know the password to the private part of that key, in order to allow me to log in. So that's where the second step comes in. There's also all of these buttons which are quite useful. So things that you can do of particular interest are if you did not upload an SSH key when creating your account, you can use the Add Credential button to upload a new SSH key. There's only one credential type, which is SSH public key. Click Next. You can then either copy and paste the contents of your SSH public key, or you can choose a file. And if you look, I'm in my home directory /.ssh. I've got a number of SSH keys. Let's just go with, I don't know, this one. I can open that up, click Add, and you'll notice that now I have, rather than just having the one SSH key I had before, I've got a second one. At the very end of the page, it says that its status is pending, which means that at the moment I can't use it to log into Archer 2, but it will very quickly become active. In fact, if I refresh this page, you'll see it's already active. So I can also use, I can now use either of these SSH keys to log into Archer 2. The final couple of buttons that are interesting are, I mean, all of the buttons are useful, but the final ones of note for this session are, if it is your first time logging into Archer 2, you will have a temporary password that has been set. The temporary password for Archer 2 is, so this is a bit convoluted, but your SSH key will have a passphrase and your Archer 2 account will have a password, and that passphrase and that password are not the same and should not be the same. If you use the same thing twice, then that reduces the security that we're trying to keep for the system. So when you first want to log into your Archer 2 account, you will have a temporary password. And the way that you can access your temporary Archer 2 password is by logging into Safe and clicking View Login Account Password. And it'll say the password for your account is this. This password, if you use this password to log into Archer 2, you will be asked to change that password immediately. When you are asked to change that password, you will need to enter that password again and then enter a new password and enter that new password again before being allowed to log in. Because I've already done this for this account, I'm okay to show you that this was my temporary password when I first set up this account. But if you look here, it tells you if you have logged in and changed your password, that change may not be reflected here. So in this case, this password has nothing to do with the current password I'm using on Archer 2, which is why it's okay for me to share it. Otherwise, I would not be sharing this. If you ever forget your Archer 2 password, you can ask for a new password by clicking the request password reset button, and that will update your login account password, which means that whatever is in here will change, and you can then log in using your new temporary password, which you'll need to reset. So that is a very quick overview of how to log into Archer 2. Let's talk a bit more about the Archer 2 system. At this point, can I check? It appears that there is one person, or there are a couple of people who haven't been able to log into Archer 2. Would you like, do you feel that you would be able to log into Archer 2 with what I've just said, or would you like one of us to help you onto Archer 2? If you need any help, please let either me or one of the helpers know, either in the normal chat, or you can contact us by private message, and we'll try to answer as best we can. And at this point, I'll check. Do you have any questions that you would like me to answer? I realize I kind of went through this quite quickly. So I mentioned that when you first get an Archer 2 account, you will get your single-use temporary password that you'll need to change immediately. When you change your password, your new password will need to adhere to the Archer 2 password policy. What this password policy says is, it just defines how your password can be made. There's sort of two philosophies about how you should go about setting up your password. The first one is your password should be long, because that makes it harder to hack. The second one is your password should have a number of special symbols, because that makes it harder to hack. Actually, using both is entirely sensible, by the way. That's what I tend to do. But for Archer 2, for our password policy, or the password policy that we've implemented on Archer 2, is really trying to ensure that we keep both sides happy, because both sides have decent arguments for why their side is correct. So the Archer 2 password policy is as follows. Your password must have a length of 18 characters. But if you do certain things to increase the difficulty of your password, then that length will be reduced. So for instance, if you use both upper and lower cases, you can use you can have a password that is of length 2 fewer than 18. So you could have a 16 letter or password, provided that you use both upper and lower cases. You can have a 14 character password if you use numbers and uppers and lower cases. You can have you can reduce that by a further 2 characters if you also use punctuations. So that means that you will end up with a password which is somewhere between 10, or the minimum password that you can use is between 10 and 16 characters. Usually I would say even, I'll talk about what I personally do for passwords in a sec, actually. But then there's a couple of additional things. For instance, you can't have much overlap with a previous password if you're changing passwords. You're not required to use multiple character types. You can't have more than 2 identical consecutive characters, so you can't have AAA, for instance. And there's a dictionary check that happens on passwords to make sure that you're not just using a single word for your password. So what I tend to do for my passwords actually is I tend to sort of go with book titles, and I kind of take two or three books that are completely different from one another and just merge their titles, which usually ends up being in the somewhere between 15 and 25 character region. And then I'll usually use that as a basis, and that way that's quite easy for me to remember, and is also a decent password. I do a couple of other things which I won't get into here as well. But the reason why I do this is because there's an excellent XKCD cartoon, which I've got here. XKCD is a webcomic where it's a webcomic by Randall Munroe, who used to be I think he was a NASA robotics person. But he does a number of comics on things sciencey, and that can range from physics. There's definite computational things in there. There's astrophysics. There's chemistry. There's a huge amount of like it's a good webcomic. But this one specifically is a fascinating one where he sort of talks about cryptography and how this dates from a couple of years back, like probably it's about a decade old at this point. I can't quite remember, but he sort of talks about how at the time, about a decade ago, most sites would enforce passwords that needed uppercase letters, lowercase letters, special characters, and things like that. But those are incredibly difficult for a human to remember. However, the amount of cryptographic additions you get from doing that makes it not necessarily that difficult for a computer to guess. So here, for instance, he shows that this password troubadour &3 is actually, if you look at the entropy, so the complication, how quickly a computer could randomly guess this password, there's about 28 bits of entropy, which means that a computer could probably crack this in 3 days if it's making 1,000 guesses per second. So it's quite easy for a computer to hack, or it was even a decade ago. But it's actually quite hard for a human to remember. And what Randall Munroe suggests instead is, well, if you do something like bunching together common words, random words, that make sense to you, but don't necessarily make sense to anyone else, you can end up with more bits of entropy because of the length of the words and the length of the password, which makes it harder for a computer to break. But it's much more easy for a human to remember just words, plain words, than it is something with word symbols and things like that. And so that's where the two theories of cryptography come from. So with that having been said, let's do our first exercise for the day, which is let's talk a bit about passwords. And here we've got 4 example passwords. And I'd be really interested to hear if you just go, and please don't click solutions because that'll just give you the answers. But if you could in the chat tell me which of these 4 passwords do you think are appropriate? Do you think are good passwords and would be accepted on Archer 2? In case. That. Okay, so everyone's saying 3 at the moment, which is interesting. Demetrius is saying 2 and 4, 3 and 4. Okay, so there's a couple of cool. There's a couple of so first of all, well done everyone for not choosing number 1. My password is a terrible password, and it's still scary. Like every year or so, I always end up on a news story where there's someone sort of saying these are the top X passwords that we found are used on this website, and the number of times that you get things like password, my password, 123 ABC, things like that. Like, yeah, people still use really scarily poor passwords. But yeah, my password is terrible. Now, number two, let's have a quick look at it. Number two has, I believe, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 19 characters, which means that they're all lowercase as well. So the minimum password length is 18 characters, which means it just passes on that criterion. It's more than 18 characters, thereby, for Archer 2, it is an accepted password. This one here, I believe, is 11 characters. It has an uppercase, a lowercase, a number, and a special character, a number of special characters, which means that it needs to be 18 minus 8 is at least 10 characters long. It is 11 characters long, so that one is also probably a password, or likely a password that would be acceptable on Archer 2. The final one, horse battery staple, is 18 characters, which means already it passes the minimum length of 18. However, I just showed you that it's in a webcomic. And so while it might be acceptable as a password on Archer 2, I've never tried. I wonder if anyone else, if any of the other organizers have tried using horse battery staple as a password on Archer 2 just to check whether it works. But I think it should be accepted. However, I've just shown that it's been used in a webcomic, which means it's one of those passwords that's quite well known and thereby probably not a safe password to use. And I would recommend against using it. If you look at the solutions, the first one is not accepted. The second and third are accepted because they both fit in the Archer 2 policy. And the number two is also a good choice because it's quite an easy one to remember. Rainbow llama jumping, quite easy to remember. The third one has enough cryptographic additions to it to make it a difficult password to hack. And the fourth one is probably not an ideal password because it's known about from a webcomic. We've talked about SSH keys. So the final thing I'd like to talk about in this session is talking about data transfer. So we'll be doing some minor data transfer on Archer 2. But the main thing, I think at the moment I think Globus Online is available now. So there's three ways, three methods that you can transfer data to and from Archer 2. You can either use SCP, which is the SSH copy command, which is the best way to transfer small to medium amounts of data. One of the upsides about the SCP command is it's usually quite quick. Yes, as Andy points out very correctly, number 3 is no longer a good choice because we've just discussed it on this course in a while, so it's public on the internet. And indeed, number 2 is likewise also a poor password for that reason. So where was I? Yes, so SCP is quite quick and just uses the same SSH protocol that you've been using to log into Archer 2. However, one of the downsides is if for whatever reason, let's say you've got a poor internet connection or anything like that, your command drops, you'll need to restart from the very beginning, which means there's no checkpointing with SCP. rsync is similar to SCP and similarly quick to SCP. And it allows you to synchronize data on 2 locations, which means that you can even use rsync to let's say you've already copied over half a directory, or you copied over a directory yesterday. You've done some work on it on Archer 2, and you want to copy over the rest, you can use rsync to just copy over the new bits rather than copying over everything, which can save you a significant amount of time sometimes. The other nice thing about rsync is because it is synchronizing the data on two places, you can use it to, it's possible to partially copy something and then complete the copy later. So what that means is, for instance, if in the example I gave before, your internet suddenly drops, then that means that with SCP, you wouldn't be able to just restart from where you finished off. With rsync, you would be able to just restart from where you finished off, which can, again, save you a significant amount of time. And then finally, I think that this is now available, but there's also the possibility for very large file transfers, and we're talking like orders of terabytes here. You can use Globus Online to transfer those large amounts of data from Archer2 to other sites where Globus Online is enabled. You can find more information on data transfer mechanisms on the Archer2 in the Archer2 documentations. And in general, for everything Archer2 related, the documentations are excellent. And it sort of gives you a number of tips and tricks as well to make file transfers more efficient. Is it different from MOBA exterm data transfer? I don't know what MOBA exterm uses to transfer data, I'm sorry. I can look it up during the break and I'll get back to you on that, if that's okay. I suspect it uses SCP, but I'm not 100% sure. Cool. When you're transferring data, there's a couple of best practices and ideas that you might want to keep in mind. The first one is that not all data are created equal. So it's important to understand your data, know which of your data is important, know which of your data and which of your data are important, know which of your data are critical. And if you lose them, then that's your work gone for the last year and a half. Versus the data that you can just very easily reproduce and rerun super quickly and cheaply. For the ones that are super cheap or the ones that really won't set you back that long, there's no real point in backing them up because you can just remake them. But for the ones that will bring you back a year, 2 years, or whatever, you probably do want to back up somewhere. You should always consider having a data management plan, even just taking 5 minutes to say, well, what happens if everything goes terribly wrong? How long would it take me to get back to the point where I am? And that's quite a useful trick. The other thing as well is once you have your data management plan, test it a couple of times to make sure that it works. I've had, recently I've had a classic horror story of someone who'd set up a shell script to push, to do a weekly push to GitHub of some of their files. And they only noticed after their computer died, or their laptop died, that there was an error in the code. So the things hadn't been updating for like a year and a half. So make sure also that your data management plan works and that you're actually doing the transfers you think you're doing, even if it is just an occasional check. The next one is minimize the data that you're transferring. Transferring data takes time. And it takes time in two ways. It takes some of your time, which is super valuable. There's lots of things you could be doing that are more exciting and interesting than transferring data, but it also takes computer time. So by making sure that you're only copying and transferring the data that you need to transfer, you can reduce that time and be more efficient. The next one is quite a fun one, actually. It's if you minimize the number of data, the amount of data that you're transferring, you should try to minimize the number of files that you're transferring. And And the reason for this is that for every file that you transfer, there's a static overhead, which means that there's an additional cost to each transfer, to each file transferred. Now, there's ways to get around or reduce this cost by zipping files together by either using tape archives, the tar command, or by using the zip command. And then all of a sudden, you can take an entire directory with a ton of files in it and make it appear, in fact, be all contained in one file. And then when it comes to transferring, instead of having the overhead for every single file in your subdirectory, you only get the overhead for the one single zipped file. So zipping your files before transferring can be a very useful way of really, really reducing the transfer overhead, especially if you're transferring a ton of small files. You can consider compression. There are many tools that have options to use compression. So for instance, rsync, tar, and zip all let you compress things. You're generally encouraged to do that to reduce the data volumes. However, in some cases, the amount of time that you end up taking in compressing your data might be longer than the amount of time you'll save by transferring it when it comes to transferring it. So it's always important to make sure, you know, if you're only transferring a couple of, make sure that it's worth it before you spend the time doing this. And finally, with a lot of transfer protocols, there's an encryption overhead. So when you're transferring data with SCP and rsync over SCP, your data is first going to be encrypted, which is also going to add an overhead per file. Now you can reduce this overhead again by using more minimal encryption methods. One of the fastest ones you can use is the AES-128 CTR encryption, which is at the moment is generally just available on most processors. But using a lesser encryption, especially if you don't think that what you're transferring is risky or anything like that, then you can also save a significant amount of time. So at this point, there's a final quick exercise for this session, which is how to create an uncompressed zip archive and verify its contents. So in general, I'm trying to think, I don't think we'll be doing too much on that needs compression at this point, so I'll leave that as an exercise for you to do in your own time. And instead, I'd rather take the last 10 minutes to sort of talk very briefly about the Archer2 file systems and how they're set up. So please, at this point, feel free to, I'll be doing this all entirely from shell, but please feel free to follow along because I think that this will be quite useful. That's sharing. So I'm on Archer2, and if I click PWD, which stands for Present Working Directory, it shows me that I am in the home/TA059/TA059/TA059JS directory. So I am in my home directory. The home directory is about 1 petabyte large, which is a significant amount of data, but it's shared amongst all Archer2 users. So actually it ends up very quickly not being as large as it might first appear. This directory is backed up for recovery, disaster recovery purposes. So if anything terrible were to happen to Archer2, anything that you have saved in your home directory will be recoverable. However, the home directory is not visible to the compute nodes. So Archer2 is a cluster. We are currently on the login nodes. When later today we will be running simulations on, we will be running those simulations on the compute nodes. The compute nodes don't have access to the home directory, which means that if we want to submit work to them, we'll need to go in a different directory, which is our work directory. And you can get to your work directory by doing cd/work/your project, and then your username. And you'll notice that the only difference is I've changed this home here to a work. Yeah. And now if I do present working directory, I am in my work directory. So we will be doing most of the work in today's session from our work directory, because that is the one that allows us to submit jobs to the compute nodes. That is the one where when we submit jobs to the compute nodes can still see this directory and also see this directory. The other couple of things that I wanted to mention about this is general Archer 2 things. For every single project, there is a top project directory and a bottom project directory. If we go into the top project directory, so I am in TA 059, you'll notice that there's usually just two directories there. There is the shared directory and access to the bottom project directory. This shared directory is a place where you can put things that will then be visible to any other Archer 2 users. So for instance, if I don't know, if I do this, this file will now be visible to any other Archer 2 user. So you could, any of you could run cat / work TA059 shared and see my hello.txt file. And this is true for every other directory. So I think I'll have done something similar in there. Yeah. So for instance, I am not a member of the TA058 account, but I am able to get to that shared directory and see, for instance, that there's a that this has apparently a version of lamps. The other directory, the bottom project directory, so /work /TA059 /TA059 is only visible to members of the TA059 project. So if I now do an ls, it shows me all the usernames for all of the other members of this project. And you'll notice that there's also a shared directory here. This shared directory is also present in for every Archer 2 account, but it is only visible to members of the TA059 project. So if I do this, anyone who is a member of TA059 should be able to view this. What was it? It's called hi. Yeah. Which means anyone who's got an account here will be able to see this. However, this is not true for other projects. So as you saw before, I was able to look into the TA058 shared directory. I will not be able to look into the TA058 shared directory because I am not a member of that group. And indeed, it tells me permission denied. So if you want to share any files, or if Holly and I want to share any files with you when doing some of the exercises, we'll probably put it in the shared directories. So that's why it's a nice thing to be aware of. So I think with that, I will check very quickly. I've realized I've done a lot of talking in the session, but please do let me know your questions. I'm more than happy to answer them. Otherwise, if there are no questions, I guess that we can start our break a bit early. And when we come back from our break, Holly will be, actually, give me a sec. Holly will be talking about how to prepare GROMACS systems, so prepare simulation systems. Take a protein database file and make it so that you can use it with GROMACS. And as Holly rightly points out, please let us know if you've not been able to log in and would like help with logging in. We'll be staying here over break to make sure that we can help anyone who's not managed to log in. Getting access to Archer 2 will be very useful for this course. Okay, so one of the questions is, I do not have permissions to access the work directory. Uh, could, could you check that? So the way that I accessed the work directory, what was it? I went cd/work/tao59/tao59. And at this point, I put in my username, which is tao59. Yes, I've got too many accounts now, as you probably saw earlier. I tend to use this as a shorthand. You'll need to enter your username instead. So for instance, if your username is HJTAO59, you would instead need to use HJTAO59, which I suspect is Holly. And if your username is something else, you'll need to use your username. The other thing as well is, if you're using your Archer2 account, or if you're using an Archer2 account that is different from the Archer2 accounts for this course, you'll obviously not have access to the TAO59 files. I hope that helps answer your question. If you still can't access the work directory, please let me know and we'll talk about it over the break. Otherwise, I'll just very quickly wrap up by what we've discussed. And the things we've discussed in this session are, we've talked about how to log into Archer2, password policy for Archer2, how to set up an SSH key, how to set up, how to reset your password, find your temporary password. And then we also discussed briefly transferring data to and from Archer2. And also we discussed the difference between the home and the work directory, if very briefly. So with that, I think that it's as good a time as any to stop with this first session to the introduction for GROMACS. And as I say, when we will reconvene at, I think it's 1:15. Let me check. We'll come back at 11:15 to for our next session, which is about preparing a GROMACS system. Cool. I hope you have a good break, everyone, and we will see you in 15 minutes.
Okay, can everyone see my screen okay? Cool, that's good. Okay, so we've discussed a lot this morning about using Archer2 and logging on to Archer2, looking at the file systems on Archer2 and passwords. So this is our first proper GROMACS session. So we're going to start by sort of discussing what is GROMACS. So GROMACS is a molecular dynamics simulating package. It's quite commonly used. It's open source, so free to use. It's primarily designed for doing biochemical simulations, such as proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. So this is different to some other molecular dynamics simulating packages, such as LAMPS, which have more focus on solids and crystalline systems. So GROMACS has a lot of optimizations in the code itself that make it perform well compared to other programs. So you often see it's quite well performing. And it also includes a big range of tools for topology building, editing a system, and doing analysis on trajectories after you've run a simulation. So I've provided a link to the GROMACS website here. This has got a lot of documentation about using GROMACS, some information about GROMACS itself, lots of stuff about how to run it, how-to guides, information about installing it, and some tutorials as well. So this is a really good place for resources for you to go away after this session and get a bit more familiar with GROMACS. So I will go back to the course. So in this session, we're going to be looking at preparing a GROMACS system. So this will take you right away from downloading a PDB file, so a protein databank file from the protein databank, and then taking this file, doing the steps you need to do on it in order to get it in a position where you can then run a GROMACS simulation. So within this, this will involve doing some cleaning of the file, also solvating your system, making sure it's charge neutral, and basically setting up topologies and all the different input files that GROMACS needs in order to run. Was that a question I missed? Okay. So yeah, the first thing I'm going to do is share my screen, and we're going to work through this example together. So I will share my terminal. That does not appear to have worked. Let's try again. This might be because it's on a different screen. Maybe it's just taken a while. Nope. Okay, this is not working. I'm going to quickly restart Chrome, just restart my browser. So I'll be gone and back in a couple of seconds. Okay, hello everyone. Let's just try this again. Oh, could someone make me a moderator? Thank you. Okay, it's brilliant. That's working. Okay, so yeah. So the first thing I'm going to do actually is log into Archer 2. So if you've all logged in before, for part of this session today, we're going to be using X11 Forwarding. This is because we're going to be doing some visualization with VMD. So if you've logged in previously, but you haven't used this -x command, which does X11 Forwarding, you'll have to log out and then log back in again. I'm sorry, that's a little bit annoying, but it'll be better to do this now rather than later on, having to log out and then log back in again. So if you logged in and you didn't use this -x command when you logged in, please could you log out and then log back in again? And I'm going to log in with this command here right now. Into my passphrase and then my password. So the -X command enables X11 forwarding. So this is if you're trying to use visualization software over the terminal. This allows, basically it just allows this. So later on, we're going to be using an application called VMD. So I believe in PuTTY there is an option somewhere that you can switch on within the settings. So this isn't massively important. It'll be nice if you can do this for an exercise later on, but everything else can be followed. And I'll just show you how it works. So let me type my password. And I've logged into Archer 2. So as Julian mentioned, I've logged in, I'm in my home directory. The first thing to do is change into our work directory. Okay, within this, I'm just going to make a directory. I'm going to call it GROMACS system. Okay, so we've now logged on. So the first part of this exercise, we're basically just going to download a protein from the protein data bank. So the protein we're looking at is pepsin. It's an enzyme that's used in digestion. If you're on the course page, you can click on to its PDB entry file, and then you can see the protein itself. Let me just share this. So here on this protein data bank page, you can see all the information about your protein. There's a picture of it there. You can find out where it came from. So this is a pepsin protein found in a pig. And then there's lots of other information about its atoms, what kind of state it's in, all the sequences and residues. Okay, I'm going to switch back to my terminal now. Okay, great. And now I am going to download this protein that we have. So I've got this command here that's in the course page. So this is a wget command. Basically, this is just a link to the location of this file where you download it from the internet. You can actually, if you go back to that PDB page, you can find this link and copy it. And this wget command basically just pulls this file from the internet and gets it onto your system. So you can see here, it's connecting to the protein data bank and saving this file to 5pep PDB. And then if you type ls, you'll see that it's there in your directory. So yeah, you can now have a look at this file that we've just downloaded. So PDB files contain a lot of information in them at the top. They basically contain the atomic structure, the structure of your protein system, and lots of information about it as well. So yeah, you can see there's a header here, so this gives its name, the date it was added, and its kind of shorthand name, which is 5-PEP, and then all these different things that begin with information about where they're from. So it's scientific from an organism, the author for the paper, and the paper of where this protein was originally published. And then there's a ton of remarks which contain information about it. So you can see here, it's quite useful to know the number of protein atoms in the system, 2,426. And then there are 371 solvent atoms as well. And then there's lots of more information. So this goes through sort of different bond lengths, any other stuff, this stuff about symmetry. So there's a lot of extra information that you probably don't need to look at, but it's nice to be aware that it's there. Symmetry groups. All these. Okay, and eventually, once you've looked through all these remarks, which is quite a lot of, yeah, the sequence of the residues, information about all that. So it's quite a lot. And then finally, you see the list of all the atoms and their coordinates within this protein. So here you'll have atom number, name, residue name, and residue number. And then I think this is for protein A, then the coordinates, and then again the atom. So this will list everything in your system. We've had a quick look at that and the format of that file. And so the next step we're going to do is actually clean this system a bit. So we saw from looking at it, this file contained our protein. It also contains some water atoms. So we saw there was a list of solvents. If you go to the very end of this, you'll see there are some waters. So the first thing we're going to do is take these water atoms out of the system because they're not needed, and we're actually going to solvate the system later on. So we want to start with just the protein itself. So the first thing we're going to do is use a command to get rid of these. So you saw inside this file, all the water atoms have this HOH symbol connected to them. And basically we can use this to remove these lines from the file. So I'm going to be doing this with the grep command. This stands for get regular expression. So normally, oh, okay. So is this when you're trying to download the PDB file? That's interesting. So you're on Archer 2 when you're doing this? So maybe I'll try double check copying the link again. Make sure that copied correctly. Yeah, so it's a bit difficult because it's taken off the HTTPS when you. Okay, so that's working now. That's good. Okay, great. So I'm going to use this grep command to strip the waters out of this file. So what grep usually does on its own is you can use it to search for a pattern, for example, HOH, and then you act on it on the file name. So basically it takes the two arguments, your pattern you're searching for, and then your file name. So this is its standard use, and this will basically find all lines within your PDB file that contain this pattern. And it can be used on any file. So as you see, it's found all the water atoms. What we actually want to do is the opposite of this, though. So if you add this -v command in the front, this gets all lines which do not contain this. So basically cuts out any lines containing HOH. If you run this again, you'll see the waters have been taken off. And then at the moment this is printing to screen. This isn't that useful because we want it into a file where we can actually operate on it. So you can pipe this command into a file. So call it pipe_protein. So this just contains the protein atoms. As you can see, nothing was written to screen that time, and instead we have this new file, which basically contains everything that was in the original PDB file, but without these waters. Okay, so that was the first step, just cleaning the water molecules off that file. Our next step is actually going to involve using some GROMACS commands. So GROMACS on Archer, we have it installed as a module, and this can be accessed using module load GROMACS. And what this will do is set up everything so that you can use GROMACS. So it will set the relevant paths and everything so that you can use GROMACS commands on your command line. And this is what we're going to be using to modify our system. So if I now type GMX, so GMX is the standard GROMACS way to call GROMACS on the login node, and press enter, you'll see that GROMACS is opened and run. This isn't actually doing anything yet because we've not given it any commands to operate on, but you can see that it's been called and it's offering some other options. So help, giving a list where you can get help from, and other information. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is use the GROMACS to PDB command. So, oh no, it's PDB to GROMACS. Okay, PDB to GROMACS command. Yeah, so this is basically taking your PDB format that you have here, acting upon it, and converting it into a set of files that GROMACS can then read and use to run your simulation. So the main thing that this file will do is create your GROMACS topology file. It will also look for force fields and set those up for your protein. And then it will also create a GROMACS process structure file. So this has the format, this ends with .gro. And yeah, your topology file, which is the main one. So to call this command, you first need to call GROMACS itself, and then you call this PDB to GMX command. And then you need to supply your PDB file that you're going to be using. So in this case, we use the -f option. So this is the default option for providing an input file in GROMACS. And then you want your file name. So this is the one we've just concentrated on our protein. So let's go ahead and run this. Okay, so this does a lot of stuff. I'm just going to scroll back up so that you can read it all. The first thing you're prompted to do is select the force field we wish to use. So it's actually found a list of available force fields. These are all stored within the GROMACS install on Arch 2. So you can see where the GROMACS executable is located. This actually tells you where all the data and all the topology files are also located. Oh yeah, here. So select the force field from the location of GROMACS, and these are located in the share GROMACS top directory. So there are a number of available force fields within GROMACS. There's a lot of amber force fields, so we have a few versions of the amber force fields, and then the charm force fields, and then also some GROMOS ones, different version of those, and then the OPLS force fields. In our case, we're going to select the amber 03 force field. So this is option 1. So you type 1 and press enter. It will say, using this force field located in this directory, and then it will open the force field file, which is located within here. And now it's prompting to select the water model. So again, there are a number of different water models in GROMACS. You've got the tip 3 point, tip 4 point, and some variations on that with EWALD, the 5.1, which I think is new, and the SPCE model, an extended version. So we're going to select the first one, the tip 3 point. And then this then goes away, prints a lot of information to your screen. You can see it is reading in all the relevant force fields within that directory. Looking at your PDB file, it's found information about it. It's found this protein chain, it's got this many residues and this many atoms. Again, looking through the force fields, analysing, then it's printing this matrix for distances between different residues. You don't need to worry about that so much. And then it will generate any missing hydrogen atoms if these aren't present, making the bonds. And then it'll list some information about the topology. And then see at the end it prints the total mass of your system and the total charge. So we'll notice here you've got a negative charge of minus 38 electrons. And finally it writes the topology and writes the coordinate file. Okay, and then just a summary of what has happened. So we note here that we don't actually have any waters in this system. However, it does ask for a water model, and this is just to provide some consistency going forward for when we solvate later, so that GROMACS knows what water model you want to use and adds any waters with the correct water model. Okay, so let's have a quick look at the files that have been generated. Okay, so we've got our 2 original PDB files from earlier. We've got this conf.gro file, which is your coordinate file in the GROMACS format. This posre file, which is the position restraint file. We'll look at that in a bit. And this topol.top file. So this is your topology file. Okay, so I'm going to look at the topology file first. This is the largest of the three and more complicated, so we'll go through this. Okay, so this is the very top of the file. You see you've got a lot of information here about when this was created, who created it, it was me, and then when and which version of GROMACS was used. So in GROMACS, lines beginning with a semicolon are commented. So it can be a bit confusing if you're used to writing in C or C++. So any line beginning with this is a comment, so it just contains information. And it prints what command line we just used to generate this file. Okay, so first thing here is it's including the force field parameters. So these are done with include statements, beginning with a hash and then include. And you can see it's included your amber 03 force field, which is the force field we chose to use, and the location of that within your force field directory. And then from this point onwards, it'll list different properties with these kind of directives. These are enclosed in these square brackets. So here, see here, we've got molecule type, and then moving on, we've got atoms, and then there's many, many more as we'll go further through, work our way further through this file. So the first directive here is the molecule type. So you can see here this comment has been provided, which gives you information about what these things are. So here the name, we've got protein chain A. It's just a standard way of naming it. And we've got one protein chain, so there's just one here. This number here is the number of exclusions. So this gives the number of bonds away for which non-bonded interactions between pair atoms are excluded. Basically, you're taking everything and the first three bonds, you exclude the pair interactions. And next, you have this atoms. So this is just listing your atoms in your protein in order. This is a little bit confusing here because my screen has wrapped this around. If I try and make it bigger, that won't help. But you can see here, this is NR, so this is the atom number. We've got a list of these around here, going down here all the way. This is atom type, so it's, lists type of the atom. These kind of things tell it a bit about the environment it's in. This is your residue number, so we've got our first residue here, which is ILE, and then as you move forward, there's more and more residues. Atom name, so this is unique to the residue itself. You'll see there's no two the same, so here we've got H1, H2, H3 as they're named in order. It's the charge group number. So this is just usually is the same as the atom number. The charge of the atom itself, so these are all the charges, and then the mass is the mass. And then here you have these type B, charge B and mass B. So these are additional types and charges and masses that are used for free energy perturbation. So they're not used in this case. And then for each residue, there's this little comment here which tells you what it is, gives its name, and then this Q, which is the total charge of the residue. And you'll see this as you scroll down as well at the end of the residue information. It'll print the Q top, which is the total charge of that residue. So yeah, this one's got a total charge of 1. So this is if you summed up all these charges here. So yeah, I'm going to jump through to the next directive. So I'm going to use, just going to search for these square brackets. So we've done that one. Okay, next thing you'll come across is the bonds. So this lists bonded pairs of atoms. So it's atom number 1, atom number 2, and then there's this function, function 1. So this function is just kind of a code for what type of interaction is being used. And you can look at these within your force field, and then you'll see the bonding parameters. So if you go into your force field file, you can find these and then see which parameters are being used for bonding between the different types of atoms. So that's the bonds. And then next we have Leonard-Jones pairs of atoms. Again, similar format of pair 1, pair 2, and then this function. Angles, these are between 3 different atoms, and then the function you're using, dihedrals, between 4 different atoms, and then there's 2 different types there. This is using 9 and this is using 4. Okay. Yeah, so if you then, I might do this in a second after I close this, you can look into your force field ITP file and see the interactions that these functions correspond to. So finally, at the end of the file, there's a bit more information. So this is here including a position restraint file ITP. So this is a if statement here. So this is if you're set to use position restraints somewhere, it will include this file, and then end if. And then this is including your water topology, which is a different place to your protein topology. And then these are your position restraints for water. So this is taking your oxygen atom in your water molecule, and these are force constants that are applied in the X, Y, and Z direction. Again, this is wrapped up in an if statement, so this is if position restraints are enabled. And finally, this topology for ions, which is included, and system name, pepsin, and then the different molecules in your system. So protein chain A, we've got 1 of those. So yeah, I'll probably move on from that. So that's everything in the top file. And then you have the conf.grow file. So this is basically just lists your atoms and their coordinates. You've got this atom, the name at the very top. This is the number of atoms you have, and then this is the name, the residue name, residue number, residue name, atom name, atom number, and then the coordinates in X, Y, Z. You can see all those there. If you go to the very end of this file, this gives you the dimensions of your box. So you've got 9 coordinates. So this is your box in XX, YY, ZZ, and then the different permutations of the 3 dimensions. And then finally, you have your position restraint file that you created. So this is restraints for your heavy atoms in the original PDB file. And again, you've just got a list of force constants in X, Y, and Z. So yeah, there's more information about that on the GROMACS website, and how all those force constants are defined. and more information as well you can find about how all these different parameters are set. I think I've put it in the course notes at the bottom there. So in that step that we just did, you may find that you get a message saying your residue is not found. So this means you're using it as a non-standard residue in your PDB file. Basically, GROMACS can't find a force field to use for it. So in this case, you probably need to generate your own force field. So there's more information on this in the GROMACS manual. And you can also use AMBER or CHARM to do this as well, using anti-chamber or CGenF in CHARM. And then you can convert these into the GROMACS format afterwards. Yeah, and there's some more information about that in the notes. Okay, so we've got our system. So now we want to generate a simulation box to put it in. So at the moment it's just in some kind of arbitrary box and doesn't make much sense. So to do this, we're using the GROMACS edit conf command. So you can see I've provided some information about this in the manual. And basically what this command does is you're taking a .gro file and then generating another .gro file, but this .gro file will be within your new box. So it'll also move your coordinates if you wish and add some kind of, yeah, basically it adds the box around it. So there's different options here. You can see the -D option. I'm going to go back to sharing this other screen. Sorry, yeah, just a second. So yeah, this GROMACS edit conf command. So yeah, it takes your input file, your .gro file that you currently have, and generates a new one. You have this -D option, which gives the separation between the input and the edge of the box. So basically, you need to ensure that this is large enough so that adjacent images don't interact with each other. So basically, when you have periodic boundary conditions, you don't want your molecule being able to interact across the edges. It's also this box type option, so you can have different options here, such as cubic, trilithic. So there's some information about this on the edit conf page and a link that I've provided there. So as an exercise, I'd like you to use this command to generate a cubic box for our system. And I'd like to make sure that the molecule is centered in the box, and there should be a separation of 1 nanometers between the edge of the box and the molecule. If you think you know what the command should be, you can paste it in either the chat or the Etherpad. Yes, the default separation is in nanometers. You'll also need another option for the centering as well, which is on the manual page. So yeah, there's a flag. If you look on the GROMACS edit conf page, you can add the center option. So it is just a flag, or you can use -C, and you don't need to provide any so the order doesn't matter in theory. Yeah, as long as, so you obviously want the separation, your number for the separation to come after the D, and then your box type to come after BT, but yeah. Okay, I'm just going to run through that in the interest of time. So yeah, you have your GMX, to use GROMACS, edit conf, is the command you're using for editing the box, and then you want to supply your current box -F option. So this is your conf.grow, and then your box type we're having as cubic. Option C does the centering, and then this D option for the separation. The default is in nanometers, so we can just use 1 here. And then your output, you want to give it a name. Remember what name I give it? Okay, 5pep-box is the name I gave it in the example, but it doesn't matter. Okay, and then this will print some information and let you know what it's changed. And now you can look at your new box that you've created, so your 5pep box. So the system looks the same, the coordinates have changed. And then if you go to the very end of the file, you can see that it's now in a cubic box. So you've just got your X, Y, and Z coordinates of the box at the bottom there. So next thing we want to do is solvate our system. So this is adding a load of water atoms into the box that we've just created. So this is done with the GROMACS Solvate tool, which is called by GROMACS Solvate. So basically what you do is this command here, the CP command takes your protein that you have. So we want to take the one we've just made in the box, CP 5-pack box, and then CS is your solvent system. So for here, this you can use a predefined option. So we are taking the SPC 216.gro option. So this is the solvent configuration file. This version is compatible with our 3-point tip model that we used for our waters. So this just specifies, the type of waters that will be added. And then your output file, call it something sensible. Again, I can't type. Solve.gro. And then you also need to supply your topology file with this P option. Why remove the waters to add them again? That's a really good question. So basically what we've done in doing this is we've taken a protein and then we're putting it into a new box, and then we want to fill that box with water. So in our original system, we had a different type of box that our protein was in. And now we've changed our box and we want the waters to fully populate this. If there's already waters there, it makes it more, it doesn't make sense to go adding in more waters on top of that. It's good to strip them out and then you can add them in a sensible way so they're all added at the same time. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so I will run this solvate command. This will print some more information again. This will tell you how many water atoms have been added. So now contains, okay, this shows that it tried to add some and then couldn't fit them in and removed them. And then at the very end, it shows you that it's added this many solvent molecules with res name sol to your topology file. On the very end here, you can see this line. It says I've just backed up topol.top to hash topol.top.1.top, and ls, you can see that it has. So what it's done here is, because it's modified, or rather created a new topol.top file in your own directory, it's decided to keep the old version with this format. So this is your previous version of topol.top, and then this is your this is your current version. So GROMACS does this in general with any files that you generate which have the same name as something in your current working directory. So it can be quite helpful if there's something you've done and you want to go back to a previous version, you can find it and reuse it. However, you could also end up with quite a lot of files in your directory with this format, as it keeps generating new ones and keeping the old one. If we look at our new topol.top, so that number of solvent molecules, it basically calculates how many it can fit within your box, given the water model that you've provided. So it'll be different, probably. Well, if you have a different size box, it will be different. And then, yeah, so the only change in your top holder top, as you see at the end here, it's added this sol. So this is your number of solvent molecules. Is it possible to choose a different density? Believe that is in the manual. Have a quick check. So there's a manual for GMX Solvate provided in the link. I don't know off the top of my head. I'll have a look into that when we get back to you after the break. Okay. And then, so the last thing we want to do is look at adding ions to our system and making it charge neutral. So we saw earlier when we first created our topol file at the very start, when we ran PDB to GMX, there was a charge on our system, and this was -38. So basically, we need to make sure our system is neutral, so that it's equivalent to the real world environment. So to do this in GROMACS, you add ions. Basically, you add ions of the opposite charge. So we'll be adding positively charged ions in order to neutralize our system. So this is done in two parts. The first part I will just quickly share the other tab. So the first part involves using this GROMPP file. So this is your GROMACS post-processor tool, preprocessor tool. So this generates a TPR file, and this is a file that you need in order to add ions. So yeah, you need to first generate this TPR file and then use this within your genion command. So the first thing you need to do this is you need some kind of instruction file for doing this when you're creating your TPR file. So in this case, you don't actually have to have anything in your instruction file, this MDP file. You can just create an empty MDP file with the touch command. This is touch mdp.run.
Holly, I think you're still sharing the web page rather than your terminal.
Yeah, I just realized that. I'm just going to switch back. Cool. So yeah, first thing you do is create an mdrun.mdp file. So this can be empty in this case because we're not actually running the simulation. We're just using this GROMPP command to generate our TPR. So if you look at this, it's empty. And then in the next command, pull GMX GROMPP, your input file, this instruction file, which is currently empty. And then your coordinates file, which is the file we just created, the solvated box, your topology file, and then your output for what you want to call this. So, oh no, I'm using the wrong one. Ions. So this GROMPP command is used a lot for generating TPR files, which are used in ND simulations. This will be covered a bit more later on. So this prints a load of stuff to the screen. There's a few notes. Warns you about your non-zero charge. There's a bit of warning about an oscillation thing, an oscillation period. Your simulation has 0. Well, yeah, that's because we didn't provide any information about the temperature, and stuff about the cutoff. Again, we didn't provide any information about this because we're using an empty file. So a lot of those notes can be ignored. And then in the next step, we're going to add ions to your system. So this is done with the genion command. Generate ions. You want to provide as an input this TPR file we just created, your topology, and then you want to tell it that we want the system to be neutral. And then your output file, okay, neutral. This is the GRO file. Oh yeah, sorry, the break is coming. I'm really sorry for overrunning. But this is the last part of this exercise, so we'll break very soon. So yeah, you run this command, and then you're prompted to select a group to replace with ions. So you don't want to select anything within your protein because you want to keep your protein intact. So the sensible option is to pick your waters, so your solvent group. So we'll press 13. And then if you look at the output file, output from this, you can see that all these solvent molecules have been replaced with sodiums. So sodium has a positive charge, and this has been used to neutralize our negative charge of 38. So I assume there have been 38 sodium atoms been added here. Okay, so you can find more information about that in the GROMACS manual. I've provided links in the document. If we know LS, we should have everything we need for the next step, which is running a simulation with GROMACS. So, yeah. That's briefly everything I wanted to cover about preparing your system. So we looked at topology files, how to create your simulation box, how to solvate your system, and then neutralizing your system with ions. So we'll go for a break now. Are there any questions before the break?